One of the features built into Excel tables is the totals row, and it's something I never really used to use much in the past because it kind of looked like it'd be easier just to make my own totals. But actually, there's some great hacks and great features of the totals row that I want to show you, and I'll talk you through them now. On a table, if you click anywhere in it, you'll get the table design menu appear, and on there you'll see there's a tick box for a total row. And if I tick that, you might not see that it's done anything, but what it's actually done is at the bottom of the screen here, it's put on this total row here. And what it'll do by default is it'll put a total on the final column, and it's put a formula in there saying that's the subtotal of whatever's showing. And the great thing about it being a subtotal is it means that anytime you filter this data, this total will reflect what is being shown in the filter. And subtotal 109 means a sum excluding any hidden or filtered rows. So it will purely be what you see on screen. But if I click on that drop down box there, let's just move up here, you'll see we have none, don't know why you want that, but average, counts of numbers, min, max, standard deviations, variations, and then hit more functions. You've got even more functions that you can use. And every time you click on another column, you'll see you get another drop down list, and you can put, say, a sum in there and a sum in there. Now, you might think, well, that's not going to save me time because I could have just dragged that formula across there on normal range, it would all work. But what is great is that when you add on new data, so let's just put on, a new row here, tab it, the totals all move down. I mean, these formulas aren't working at the moment, but these totals all move down, and they will include any new rows. So this will, you don't need to change these formulas ever because they're actually picking up the column totals from the table, and they're using this referencing system for tables, where structured references, where they pick up the column, no formulas needed. Now, the other thing about adding new data as well is that you might think, oh, you need to insert some rows here to put the new data in, but if I put these two lines here, 3 lines here, and I paste them here, you'll see that the total, even though I technically sort of pasted over the total row moved down. The table knows it needs to be at the bottom, and it will automatically shift it down, and of course it's picked up the entire range anyway. Now I'm going to put another sum on there so you can see that. And if I now, because I've now put all that in, if I take off the total row, it will disappear. And when I put it back on at any time in the future, it remembers my choices here. So if I change that one to a count, for example, take the total row off, add it back on again, it adds it back on as a count. So you can just switch them on and off depending on what you want to look at and what you want to do. So it's a great little kind of feature like that. And one thing that's perhaps a little bit of a pain about these formulas here is that you can't just copy and paste that to there, because what's happening is it's picking up the wrong column. And also another slightly annoying feature is that you can't sort of drag that reference column around as you could before. You'd have to go in and sort of change it to the right year or something like that afterwards. And that's all right, I've only got 4 columns, but it becomes a bit of a pain, to say the least, if you've got like 10 or something like that, or even 100. And you can actually get around this, because one of the things you can do is use the indirect function to refer to the column header. And don't worry if you don't know this function, but what it essentially does, indirect, is it takes literally the piece of text you give it as if it were some kind of cell reference. So if you said equals indirect A1, it's the same as saying equals A1. But in table notation, that's really useful, because I can say, rather than 2021, I can say it's indirect H3, and it will give me the whatever's in H3 as if it were some sort of reference. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to use the indirect function in there to show you that you could just copy and paste it across. So what we need to do, we need to change that into an indirect reference. So the 2021 is the only bit that's different between each of these formulas. It's the year, and it's the cell H3 that contains the year. Now it'd be nice if we could just replace that with H3, and then when we drag and drop it, it'll just change to I3, J3, K3. It's not going to do that because it's inside these square brackets and it thinks it's getting some kind of notation. So instead, we're going to use this indirect function. And the first thing we need to do is we need to tell it which table we're referring to, because although we're in the table itself, because we're using indirect, we need to give it the table name. And we're going to put that in quotes. And this table, on that table design menu, you can see it was called TBL report data. So report data. And we'll leave on the square brackets. And then the next part of the formula is going to be the whatever the contents of H3 is. So we're going to join that to whatever's in H3, which is just basically the header here. But we're not going to fix that reference because we want it to move as we drag the formula. We're then going to put an and symbol, and all we need to do is put the square bracket on the end of the reference. So this is our function. We want the subtotal of whatever the contents of H3 says in this table, and we'll close that bracket and hit enter, and you see we have the same total. Now it may not be as understandable, but you can see it's highlighting H3 and it's saying we want H3 in this table. And now when I copy across this formula, you'll see I can just copy and paste it across the bottom and it's all completely fine. And if I untick the table totals and put them back on, you'll see we've retained the formula that we typed in. We haven't lost it by hiding the total row. And so that is a way of, if you have an incredibly large amount of columns in your table, of getting like a total row that you can just like copy and paste all the way along. And of course, if you wanted to change that into a count or something, you just need to change the function number in the subtotal to the one you actually need. And I think if you do this, you get your function numbers showing. So you can see that you have all of these counts and sums and standard deviations, products, etc., that you can pick from. And I would always, on this, encourage you to use the ones starting with 1, 0, because they also account for hidden rows, whereas the ones that don't have 1, 0 in front, although seemingly the same, they will also add up data on hidden rows. They will only exclude filtered out data. So there's a bit of a workaround for table total formulas if you have loads of them and you want to just be able to copy and paste them as if they were normal ranges. If you want to get impressive results the fastest way in Excel, make sure you subscribe to this channel and have a look at these recommended videos too.